Hi, and welcome to another episode of Celebrating Small Family Businesses. Today we are celebrating Terry and Dr. Carl Page of the Medical Transformation Center in Louisville, Kentucky. Hi,
Yay.
Carl. Hi, Terry.
Hi, how you
Hi.
doing?
Nice to see you.
We're glad to have you here. You've got quite an interesting story, so I'd love to just jump right in. Um, Carl, you've been I don't want to say traditional allopathic medicine, I guess is the right term for 30 plus
That's
years.
probably the right way to phrase it. Yeah, I was traditionally trained as an internist and a pediatrician and practiced that way exclusively for 25 years and kind of transitioned over 5 years and have been in the space I'm in now for a decade.
Yeah.
Awesome. Awesome. And what is that space?
And we have a cellular medicine, anti-aging, and regenerative medicine practice. And it combines that with a functional medicine approach for complex problems. So we help people that are sick, with a really exotic issues, try to find out the root cause of what their problem is and address it that way with the cellular medicine tools that we have now in the 21st century. And we work with people just to optimize health and achieve weight goals or body composition goals or just energy, get them functioning as best they can.
And just really optimal aging. Some people just want to head things off at the pass, especially too with people now looking at their genetics and their predispositions and maybe watching their parents age not so gracefully. And they want to know what they could do today to head that off, get the best outcome.
I like
Yes.
what that you said, optimal aging, because anti-aging is someone thinking, it's possible to reverse aging or stop aging. No, not really, but
It's
we
like
can sure
taxes.
slow down the amount of
You
damage
can
that's
definitely slow
accumulated,
down
right?
the train for sure. That's the way.
Yes, yes, yeah,
Well, I always
oxidative
tell,
stress and that kind of stuff, right?
Right, right.
yeah, I always tell people, we're all going to pass on. We're all going to die. And so, you're right. We don't say that we have the fountain of youth, but really the point is to have the best health that we can for the time that we're here.
Yes, I've heard it said, like extending the health span instead of the lifespan. Would you tell us how you came to shift gears like that and move into this area? What triggered that?
Well, go ahead. Yeah, she likes to tell the story. She's good at it.
Well,
Yeah, go.
I tell it a lot actually because I tell it in a class that I teach 4 times a week. So
Mm,
maybe I've had a lot of practice on this one, but really, Carl was very traditionally trained and really very, very good at it. I mean, people came from all over with tough cases and things like that. So we had many years in the traditional, as you said, allopathic medicine arena, which is sometimes the absolute right answer, especially for acute care and that type of thing. But I actually had some health issues that hit the wall in about 2008, 2009, just from an accumulation of years and a lot of other factors in that. And really, the regular answers of take this medication for this symptom, that kind of old. And I was the squeaky wheel in the house. And so at one point, there was a challenge to his abilities that I might have put out there, really just to
It was
for
happy wife, happy life. You probably heard that right or
well,
right.
just to to go back to his roots because he's so good at figuring out what's wrong with things, like whether it's a something broken in the house or an electronic or anything. He's really really good at troubleshooting and finding what's wrong and fixing it. I just had to remind him one day that he could do that with people too, instead of just covering it up with a medicine. And that led us down a path at home of looking at health differently. And what we found was that there were a lot of other tools that we could add to the toolbox to really help people thrive and be well. So once I started to feel better and our family started to make a shift, we there were a lot of things happening in the healthcare arena during those years post healthcare reform and 2008 recession, and it made us really want to bring these principles into our traditional clinic that we had at the time to see how we could help folks that were looking for that type of thing. You want to kind of take that evolution from there?
Well, I'd always been curious in the traditional medicine arena about some alternatives to diagnose or manage problems that patients had. And when Terry had her issues, after all of the kids, and her primarily ended up with systemic inflammatory autoimmune GI health issues, and it just started to put some of the pieces of that together and found where I could find to train in things that they just didn't teach us in medical school. The traditional training was very focused on there's a problem and then here's your solution, and almost all of the solutions either ended up with some sort of medical device implanted in you or surgery or a pharmaceutical agent. So we didn't get any training in how do you find root cause of things and address root cause. So I spent several months and evenings studying after I finished my traditional training, getting formally educated in that space so that I could use those tools in my traditional practice, which is how we started initially, trying to integrate that form of managing patients and diagnosing problems into the traditional medical practice. And we did that for a few years, but really hybriding the two was difficult, primarily just from a financial or business standpoint. It was you spend so much time with these patients that a traditional insurance model for a copay and whatever they gave you after the
15 minutes,
copay,
10
yeah,
minutes in. Yeah.
7 minute visit even sometimes, and in many of the diagnostic tools we use were not reimbursed by the insurance model. So they were very well, they use technology and diagnostic technology that's from the 60s. A lot of times it's almost designed that way. It's like don't look in detail or don't go into too deep of a dive. It might cost too much.
So we were trying to use more advanced diagnostics and tools for our patients in that insurance-based care model. But ultimately, we decided it was a square peg in a round hole. So in 2014, we actually started Medical Transformation Center and ran it in tandem with our insurance-based primary care for about a year or so. And then we just decided there was more joy and we were helping more people in Medical Transformation Center. So we sold our primary care practice and then went through that transition period. But ultimately, we became full time in Medical Transformation Center in 2017.
Wow, that's wonderful. I applaud that so much. It would seem that the insurance companies would realize it costs less to keep people healthy than it does to try to just continually treat sick people. But
Well, what I always tell
Definitively.
patients, now, logic would tell you that, right? But all they really care about is that you make your premium payment on time. And when you think about it, they have no incentive to make you healthy after that plan year.
Ah, well,
oh,
that makes a lot of
okay.
sense.
So, yeah, so it's a conflict between short term and long term planning kind of.
Yeah,
Right,
there you
right, right.
go.
Wow.
Well, it sounds like you
Oh,
two have been working together now for many, many years, right? Even
Oh,
before you start medical transformations, correct?
yeah,
Correct.
we've been together a very, very long time. We actually grew up together and we were in junior high, high school, and college together. I mean,
Wow.
and Carl went to medical school. My original training is I'm an accountant. So that was my bachelor's degree was in accounting. And so we had a plan. We knew that I would, work as an accountant and while he was still in school and in residency, and that was really good training for me in in corporate accounting and in the business world, so that someday, right, when we finished when he finished all of his training, that we could open up a small business by ourselves. And so that's what we did in 1992. When he finished his residency, he did a double residency in internal medicine and in pediatrics, and did the board certifications and all that good stuff. And we went out to a bedroom community of Louisville, Kentucky, and hung a shingle and painted the walls. And back then we were hanging borders, if you remember those, the borders up around the wallpaper borders, and decorating it. And we started with no patients, which was fun. I mean, it was an adventure, but we ended up ultimately growing. And when we sold our primary care practice, it was a 10,000 patient practice. So
Wow.
it was a big one. Yeah.
wow. Yeah. In a bedroom community. That's a
Community of
big
Louisville.
bedroom.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, it
Yeah.
served like the Tri County area
Mhm.
because we were kind of that our county was that first stop in
From
from
the
rural
rural
counties
areas,
in
yeah.
between Cincinnati and Louisville
I
Oh,
see.
on the
cool.
interstate. And so we were just really blessed to have, and because it was pediatrics and internal medicine, I mean, we had families that we had seen for many years,
Sure.
newborns and grandma and grandpa and everything in between. So there was a lot of joy in those years.
Oh, that sounds wonderful. So you didn't have to go through that transition of working in a big clinic and practice management, overseeing everything. You were able to start on your own.
Well, most people don't do that nowadays. We were starting to see a lot of physicians just go work straight for the hospitals right out of residency, and I was one of the few people that just started out on their own, and
Well, this was 1992
yeah,
too, and it was
Hmm.
very different back then. I mean,
Hmm.
there had been a wave of
acquisitions
hospital-owned
and
practices, but people were coming back out of those back then in 1992. But no, we just started out as a small private practice and started from zero. We did the billing at night, and the insurance forms were so easy back then, relatively speaking, on a little dot matrix printer, and all of that. I mean, I'd go in and do payroll, and I did, well, that lasted about a year. I did payroll 1 year, and I have not done it since. That's way too complicated. You don't want to get into any trouble with payroll taxes there. So I've outsourced that for years now.
well, and that too, when we the longer we stayed in business, the administrative burden of practicing just kept going up and up and up. And then you had the introduction of electronic health records, which were mandated essentially. And the cost burden of that on small business was huge. It literally drove many small practices to out of business or to be able to be absorbed by the large corporate entities that could have the capital to fund that farce essentially that it was still doesn't work well.
Well, I mean, ultimately, what happened too for so many, and that really about that time, again, after 2008, after the recession, after people's insurance situations changed, and all healthcare reform, all the things that happened there that after 2008 and kind of into then 2010 and on, that really changed the landscape of private practice, which is why you saw all those private practices close during those years. I mean, what was happening was reimbursements were going down and overhead was going up. So it was really hard to maintain any semblance of margins because there was so much more red tape to take care of, like Carl said, just to see a patient. I mean, if you kind of
Hmm.
think about it, there was the referral and there was the authorization and there was, all those little pieces.
So at the same time that was happening, I was transitioning the way that I was practicing medicine. So I didn't really think of it as this is going to be a new business venture, or we're going to be doing something totally different than traditional healthcare. But it ended up that way, that we ended up at the forefront, sort of frustration with patients, with the business of medicine, and providers that are currently still stuck in the traditional way of practicing. Many of them are frustrated with that, but they don't have any alternatives. It's just basically that's the way you have to practice now. So we've developed a new business model, just sort of organically, and really when we tried to go to talk to the accountants or the lawyers, they're like, "What are you doing? What type of stuff are you practicing there?" Because there was no benchmarks for them to look at. So and even now, when I teach how to practice like this, Terry's teaching some of the interested providers how to do a business like
Yeah.
this. So that's
It's kind
we
of interesting. How you just, like Carl just said, you're going along and you're just doing the next right thing.
Hmm.
When
Hmm.
you're right, you're just doing the next right thing and growing and morphing and changing. And now we kind of, as we look backwards, realize, oh wow, we've been doing this for I don't know what 2000 really 13, so 11 years now in this business model, and I guess we are some of the originals. So now people ask us, "Oh, tell us how to do this, train us on this. Can we come and watch your practice?" And it just seems kind of funny to me because I always think to myself, I can tell you what not to do.
There you go.
Well,
I can
that's
tell you
important to know.
this didn't work, but this works. This works.
Thomas Edison figured out a lot of ways not to
I
make a
know, you
light
just
bulb, right?
fail forward, right? You just fail forward.
Exactly,
Do.
exactly so.
And fast.
And yeah, iterate,
Yeah.
iterate fast and often.
Hmm.
Wow, it seems like you figured out your roles real fast. Like some family members, one of the early struggles they have is everybody, finding their lane and figuring out their strengths and all that. But you kind of had that figured out in college. So, I mean, you guys just hit the ground running when you started in business, it sounds like.
Yeah, although I will tell you, I'm having an awful lot of fun learning the science now. That's fun. I'll go, here, why don't we do this, Carl? And he'll go, oh, that's a bad idea. No, no, where'd you get your medical degree? Or sometimes he'll go, oh, yeah, that's a really good idea. So I keep learning the science piece, which I love. I love that. I just don't like actual hands-on blood and guts, but I love the science part.
Oh,
Well,
that's
early
very
on
cool.
in our original practice, I came home one day. It was the first couple of weeks, and Terry would take the receipts, for the day and look at them and for the week, and then she said, "Where's the $20 missing from Thursday?" It's like collections, and I said, "Well, I had to eat lunch," and she goes, "You can't do that." It's like so basically after that, they just took all of the money out of my hands, and I'd do the medical side. Don't mess with any of that. So it
Uh,
works.
so, Terry, you mentioned teaching a class 4 nights a week, and I wanted to come back to that. What is that?
Oh, well, we have learned over the years that there are just some very foundational principles that our patients need to grasp in order to get the full benefit out of working together. And, we used to just always tell people, this is a partnership. You have your part, we have ours, but it only works if we work together. And, there were a lot of different things we would talk about, and we would give suggestions and recommendations and chart notes and that type of thing. But what we realized, and we built a large facility in 2021, and that was one of our goals was to have areas where we could do in-person classes. But we've also learned too that people like Zoom. So we do a combo. I do 4 classes a month in Zoom and 4 classes a month in person on these topics, but basically just foundational principles about the impact that nutrition and gut health and environmental toxins and factors and so forth have on overall health. And, we can help with some really cutting edge tools to repair damage, but actually the patient does the work of being mindful of purchasing preservatives, processed foods, all the toxins and artificial sweeteners, all those other things. And so in the class that I teach, I do a 101 and a 102. And in 101, I do tell that story, like the more full story of my health journey, because whenever you tell a story, people hear elements of themselves in that, and then they get it and they realize, oh well, while I didn't think my Diet Cokes had anything to do with my problem, I realize now what impact that's had on my gut and permeability and microbiome and brain health, blah, 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 all the different things that impacts. So that's really what I try to do, is connect those dots for people.
Oh,
And what better way than a story, right?
yes, yeah,
Absolutely.
and an impactful story. I mean, we interviewed somebody not long ago that she had a health crisis. She was working so hard, just trying to climb the ladder, and that she neglected her health, and she got shingles and lost the sight in one of her eyes, and that caused her to really shift her focus and change her lifestyle. But
Yeah. That's interesting you say that, because shingles is part of my story.
ah. Yeah, mine
Yeah.
too, just a little bit. So, what is a challenge that you've overcome together that you think other family business owners could learn from? Something about how the family working in the business. Is there something that comes to mind? Is that
Well,
part of
to
your
me,
journey?
stay in your lane would be one of them, but really that kind of translates to draw some boundaries between we're at work now and now we're at home, and not to take the work where it's 24/7, because it really just disrupts normal family dynamics, and you can never relax if you're working 24/7 and on weekends and holidays reviewing contracts or records or the books. I mean, at some point you've got to draw a boundary there. Nobody else would take their work home like that. You've got to learn what to leave and when to leave it at the office.
Yeah. Kind of as a little bit of an offshoot to that, I would say when you're at the office, very much a boundary around that in terms of the way you speak to each other. I mean, you might be really mad at each other when you're at the office, but you have to remember that you are in a professional setting, and that's not how you would speak to a coworker, right? Not the same thing that maybe you might have been thinking 5 minutes before when you were at home. So, trying your best to keep that boundary of just overall professionalism, and also not being too familiar or flirty as spouses in the workspace. Too many public displays of affection, things like that, because again, that's uncomfortable for people. So either way, you want to just have that level professional interaction, as opposed to one way or the other too much.
Perfect.
Cool.
Really well said. We could go on that for a little bit.
Yeah. There again, we've seen that
The-
in small family businesses. I worked in a small one, and they were always at each other's throats.
Yeah.
It's hard when you're standing there trying to sell something, and then they're back there bickering, and then your customer goes, "Can't take it. I'm out."
Mhm.
So
yeah, so we've seen how that impacts, but
Yeah.
yeah, that family familiarity, I guess it's a different type of boundary, right? We
Right.
don't have that dispassionate or
It comes in handy. I mean, I know if Terry's embezzling from me, she's taking it home, so it's like,
Wow. Hey.
that's cute.
Oh goodness.
So what have you learned about yourself working together?
What have I learned about myself working together?
I've learned I don't like spreadsheets, but anyway,
There you go.
that's yeah. I just want to see the last number, right?
Ooh, I've got a good one too there. Then this
Good.
is really, oh, now we're going personal on this one. But remember earlier when I said he's so good at finding the problem and being that critical thinker. And, I mean, that it's a strong suit and that's why he's such a good diagnostician. But I will tell you that that's a tough one in the personal world.
Yeah.
So recognizing that that's actually one of the qualities that I really love about him, but maybe just not so much when he's noticed the spot here on me or the whatever, trying to balance that of, oh yeah, but that's actually it's a really good quality too.
Yeah, I can find something wrong with anybody except usually myself.
Well, it's a trained focus, right? And getting to that root cause do you find that with these newer kinds of medicine and the new technology that you approach diagnostics from a different angle? I mean, like maybe a non-linear or non-logical, when something isn't obvious. Do you like really go outside the box, or how does that work?
Well, I mean, just from my job there's a lot of times when I'll see patients and fairly quickly have a gut or a gestalt of here's what's going on. But you have to throw that out so that you don't, sometimes you stare at the obvious and you miss some things in the weeds that are very important. So, I'll take that initial impression and, make a mark on it and so that I remember it. But then I spend the rest of the time digging through the weeds to make sure there's not something else or something less obvious that's really the problem. And now, as far as the cellular medicine is really working just at the basic physiology of the cell and trying to optimize energy metabolism. How do you take fat, protein, and carbs and turn it into ATP? And energy. It's going to be also pH balance. It's going to be redox balance or reduction oxidation balance. So the things that make a cell run efficiently or the things that impair it from running efficiently, or also if you can fix those, then and you fix the cell. And if you fix a single cell, then you're on your way to fixing a multicellular organism, which is what we are. So it's very in depth and detailed. Actually, now there may be some seems tangential, but you just have to understand the language of how that cell functions, and it's really very very structured and organized way that it functions to be in its homeostasis, or everything's happy and everything's running efficiently. So we just try to help it achieve that. And now there may be the group of problems that may create pathology or maybe different, but ultimately at the cellular level, they cause almost the same dysfunctions. So it's like a lot of times I'll tell a patient that the scar is a scar. I can't tell you what cut it or what caused it. It's just a scar, but so many things lead to that damage, but they all sort of lead to the same space.
Oh, that's so cool. I
Cool.
mean, yes, I would love to just geek out about all this. You mentioned redox. That's something I learned about 12 years ago, and yeah, transformative, really transformative. I'm not a doctor, okay, a layman, but I started looking into what causes this and what causes that, and I found my own, again, researching on the internet, but, well, we don't really know what causes that disease, but, it's associated with, these lifestyle factors and oxidative stress. And, oxidative stress just seemed to be this, baseline thing that, the body, we got to clean up the garbage, right? The body, the cells have to have a mechanism for recycling and cleaning up. And if there's too much trash piling up, they can't clean up. And so then it builds up and we get sick. I mean, that's my.
Well, and it's a balance too. You can have reductive stress too, where you have too many reducing agents. And a lot of times now we'll have, the just like pH, acid base metabolism, where a cell is designed to function in a very narrow range and be healthy. There's a narrow range of redox balance where the cell's happiest and functions most efficiently. So you can over antioxidize, and that's actually, happens nowadays. People think that taking too many they take too many antioxidants, therefore they have now reductive stress. So the cell is not efficient in that space, just like it would be if it doesn't have enough antioxidants.
Wow.
Now that's a brand new. I hadn't heard of that.
Cool.
Very cool.
Sure you don't want to come to Florida to practice?
I don't know. I think
I'm a Florida native, so I was born in Homestead. So.
we are kind of interested in that whole Sarasota area. So if you've got an idea.
Well, that's only an hour south of us, so we're good.
We'll keep our eyes open. What's next for you guys? Where do you see your practice in 5 years or so?
So what we've been doing for the last few years is, as we grew, whenever you grow and there's just a few of you and it's all hands on deck and everybody can pinch hit and that type of thing, and then you start to grow your team, you need standard operating procedures, different structure, that type of thing. And so our practice has been really growing quite a bit in the past, I'd say 4 or 5 years. So as we've done that, we've tried to really create systems and processes so that we are able to duplicate in a number of different ways. One of them is that we actually just recently hired our first physician into the practice, and Carl is working with her and training her on how to think like this, which has been wonderful, because ultimately we do want this to be standard of care, which is why Carl mentioned earlier that we go about a lot different. I think we've been out of town several weekends in the past 2 months. We go out and we work with other practices and practitioners that want to apply these principles in their practices. But also for our own, we do want to make it to where Carl is not the only physician here, therefore the only one that can see patients, but he has trained a team that can apply these principles, this MTC method, if you will. And then, I don't know, we're kind of looking at, like you just said, expanding that. Expanding that out.
That's wonderful.
We have to get the prototype just right. Just right.
Scaling's hard in this type of business because there's a lot of intellectual knowledge and experience that you can't just plug anybody into and create that over again. So, but we're trying to work with ways to develop algorithms and management strategies that will allow that to be duplicatable or scalable, whether that's with other people or with technology to allow that.
And using that lens, like Carl talked about earlier, of thinking at that very base level, how is the cell malfunctioning? What does it need? And, people applying that cellular biology, right? Yeah. At that level, to start to think through problems ultimately is what will make this duplicatable. Oh. But it's going back to your original training, isn't it?
It's back to that stuff where you took the class and you forgot about it and then went on and
I'll never need that. Yeah.
But we, all of that stuff, I had to relearn, cell physiology.
Okay. Yeah, because you learned it, but it wasn't really something you had direct interaction with. So it was just
there was no application.
No application.
Really.
It's like geometry.
I don't know if that's coming back.
We use algebra when we cook. That's what I always tell my kids. You use algebra when you convert recipes.
There you
go. We've got a friend that loves to send us memes about, another week went by and I didn't use algebra. Oh, goodness. This has been wonderful. Thank you so much.
We appreciate you sharing everything and your wisdom with us. This is great. Is there anything that you would tell a small family business, that are out there just kind of struggling? Any words that could help?
I think it, and this is, I think we've experienced this a number of times. Sometimes when it's darkest is when you are getting ready to turn around whatever situation that you're working on, when it just seems like, oh my goodness, what were we thinking? What were we doing? If you've been thoughtful as you've gone along, I'm not saying, oh, just capriciously do whatever you want and let it, go wherever it will. But if you've been thoughtful and you're moving through the steps, but it just seems like, oh my goodness, how are we ever going to get through this, or what's going to happen? I have noticed, and I don't know if you have or not too, but over the many years we've been doing this, that sometimes when it just seems the very darkest and you're thinking, what was I thinking? That's when it shifts and you
It's like
start to
no
go
pain,
up.
no gain for me. That's the way I look at it.
There you go.
Mm-hmm.
Fabulous.
It's going to hurt a little bit to get to the other side, but it's worth the effort.
But it's
Yeah.
always worth the effort. Oh, that's a great place to.
And growth without a little bit of hurt doesn't happen, does it?
No,
No.
not at all.
No.
If it was easy, anybody would have done it. And
That's right. Remember growing pains when when we were growing and things hurt, and it was just kind of like, well, it's
Yep.
all part of the process.
stretching. It's because we're stretching. Yeah.
That's right. That's right.
All right. Well, we'll wrap it up here. And
Yes.
so people can find you at
medicaltransformationcenter.com.
.com.
There you go.
Okay.
Those will be in the show notes.